They say the river gives life. But in Yámọ, the river collects debts. Long ago, the gods saved this village with a sacrifice no one speaks of anymore. The land survived, but the promise was never honored. Years later, a child was born without a name. The river spoke to that child. The water moved when the child moved. And when the river grew angry, the village began to drown while standing on dry land. Canoes overturned without wind. Children dreamed of drowning while awake. And elders realized something terrifying. The gods were not punishing Yámọ. They were collecting what was owed. Because the child they called the borrowed one was never meant to belong to humans. And when the river finally awakened, it remembered every debt.
Welcome to Tales by Nnamdi. Subscribe, like, and comment as we journey through another episode.
In Yámọ, water was not just water. It was law. The river ran through the heart of the kingdom like a living spine, wide and dark, its surface forever moving. Even when the wind slept, houses stood on wooden stilts above it, bound together by narrow walkways slick with moss. Canoes replaced roads. Paddles replaced footsteps. And every sound carried farther across water than it ever could on land. At dawn, the talking drums spoke softly. At dusk, they warned. No one fetched water after sunset. No one crossed the river at night. And no child was named at birth. Because in Yámọ, names were earned, not given. The elders taught that the river, Omo-Egbe, heard everything. It listened to prayers whispered into cupped hands. It listened to lies spoken behind closed doors. And when it chose to answer, it did so without mercy. That morning, the river was still. Too still. Chief Nnamdi, the oldest elder in Yámọ, stood at the edge of the water, leaning heavily on his carved staff. His back was bent with age, his beard white and thick like cotton. His eyes, however, were sharp, sharper than any blade forged in the kingdom. He had lived long enough to know one truth. When the river stopped speaking, disaster followed. Behind him stood the other elders, all draped in earth-colored robes, cowrie shells sewn into the hems. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. A canoe drifted slowly toward them, empty. It bumped gently against the stilts, rocking once, twice, then stopped. A murmur rippled through the gathered villagers. That canoe belongs to Tala, someone whispered. Tala the canoe maker. Young, strong, fearless, and foolish enough to love where he should not. Chief Nnamdi raised his staff, and the murmurs died instantly. Bring the priestess, he said. Moments later, she appeared. Asake, the river priestess, walked barefoot along the wooden path, her steps careful, her posture rigid. She was in her early 20s, with deep brown skin that glowed softly in the morning light. Her head was shaved clean, as tradition demanded, and sacred white markings curved along her temples and collarbones. She wore a flowing white wrapper tied tightly around her chest, beads of blue and ivory hanging at her waist. Her eyes were lowered. They always were. She had been dedicated to Omo-Egbe since childhood, sworn to purity, sworn to silence, sworn never to love. Yet as she reached the water's edge, her fingers trembled. Chief Nnamdi studied her face for a long moment. The river returned a canoe, he said. But not its owner. Asake said nothing. The river lapped softly against the stilts. The elder's voice dropped. Has the river spoken to you? Slowly, the priestess nodded. The crowd inhaled as one. What did Omo-Egbe say? Another elder asked. Asake's lips parted, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She said, a debt has matured. The drums thundered suddenly. Across the water, dark clouds began to gather, thick and heavy, rolling in against the wind. Fish broke the surface briefly, then vanished again. Chief Nnamdi closed his eyes. A debt requires payment, he said. Asake's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. No one noticed, yet. Weeks passed after the river spoke. Yámọ carried on its usual rhythm, but an undercurrent of unease threaded through the village. Canoes floated lazily along the still water, children whispered on the stilts, and elders watched from the shadows, knowing that silence sometimes carried more weight than words. Among the villagers, two hearts beat recklessly. Tala, the canoe maker, strong and daring, often laughed too loudly and challenged anyone who questioned him. His dark brown skin glistened with river sweat, his short-cropped hair damp from early mornings at work, and his hands were calloused from paddling and carving wood. He moved with the ease of someone who belonged to the water itself. Asake, the priestess, had remained as rigid and solemn as ever in public, but in the shadows of the mangroves, where the elders could not see, her heart betrayed her. She moved lightly, flowing like water itself, her shaved head reflecting the moonlight, the sacred white markings on her temples and collarbones glowing faintly as if echoing the pulse of the river. Her flowing white wrapper fluttered softly in the wind, and her blue and ivory beads jingled lightly with each step. It was under the cover of night, when the river whispered only to them, that Tala paddled quietly beside the mangrove roots. He reached for a jarkar hand, their fingers brushing as the water mirrored the stars above. "You should not be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. The river reflected her fear. "And yet I am," Tala said, grinning. "You cannot tell the river not to love me." She let out a small, nervous laugh. It was the first time anyone had heard joy in her voice. They met often, stealing moments behind the stilts under the wide canopy of mangrove leaves. Soon, whispers of their union reached the edges of the village. The river's flow slowed slightly each night they met, as if sensing the taboo. Then came the night that would seal their fate. Asake was heavy with child. Only a few months, but enough that the elders would sense if the river itself spoke. That night, Tala paddled her across the silent bend, a forbidden stretch of water where no one dared go after dark. Shadows stretched unnaturally, thickening over the water like black smoke. The river seemed to watch them, ripples rising beneath the canoe with deliberate intent. Suddenly, the water stilled. Not a wave, not a ripple. Silence as heavy as stone pressed down on them. Asake gasped. "The river, it knows." Tala gripped the paddle tighter. "Let it know. We are together." The river's voice came. Not in sound, but in sensation. The water beneath them vibrated through their bones. The canoe rocked violently, and they held each other tight. "You will be punished." A whisper seemed to flow around them, carried by the water itself. A shadow of a woman, translucent and dripping like water, shimmered near the bend, eyes glowing faintly, observing. It vanished before either could fully see. Tala and Asake paddled back in silence, hearts pounding, unaware that every moment had been recorded by the river. That night, the gods took notice. By the next morning, the first signs appeared. Fish floating belly up, the river slightly receding, and children waking from nightmares of drowning. Even those who had never touched the water. Yámọ had been saved once by sacrifice. But the debt had returned. Asake knew, deep in her heart, that her child, the one growing quietly beneath her wrapper, was the reason the river had stopped flowing, and she was terrified. The night the child was born, the river held its breath. Asake lay on a narrow mat inside her stilted home, sweat glistening on her dark brown skin, her shaved head damp, and her sacred white markings gleaming faintly under the oil lamp. The flowing white wrapper that usually wrapped her with grace now clung to her frame in sweat, and the blue and ivory beads at her waist rattled softly as she shivered. Tala crouched beside her, hands gripping hers, muscles taut from both fear and anticipation. His dark brown skin shone in the dim light, short-cropped hair damp from sweat, and the calluses of a lifetime's labor visible even in the soft glow. He whispered words of comfort, though he could feel the river's eyes upon them both. The child came silently. No cry. A faint water-shaped mark shimmered on the chest, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Asake gasped, staring at the infant as the air seemed to thicken around them. Even the river, calm until now, shivered with something older than life itself. The elders were called immediately. Chief Adigbon arrived, staff tapping the wooden floor, robe flowing, beard white and thick, eyes sharp despite age. Other elders trailed, silent and tense, their earth-colored robes rustling softly, cowrie shells jingling faintly. Asake whispered, "It is, the child." Chief Adigbon's eyes narrowed. He examined the infant, noting the watermark in the stillness. "The river has claimed its witness," he said softly. "This child is special. The prophecy returns." One of the elders, Elder Funmelaya, leaned forward. His voice quivered slightly. "The gods demand a sacrifice. Without it, the river will dry. The kingdom will fall." Ashake's hand went to her stomach instinctively, and Tala gripped hers harder. Their love had already broken the river's law. Now their child had become the hinge of Yámọ's survival. The village fell silent, save for the faint ripple of the river against stilts. Fish floated unusually still. Birds did not sing. Even the wind seemed to stop mid-path. A council decision was reached quickly. The child unnamed was to be offered to the river at the silent bend at the next full moon. The people whispered prayers, murmuring to Omo-Egbe for forgiveness. That night, as Asake and Tala held the infant, they swore silently to themselves. They would not allow the river to take what was theirs. Unseen, beneath the river's calm surface, currents twisted and churned. The water began to bubble faintly, as if tasting the future, waiting. The debt had matured. and the river would collect. Years passed like slow tides. The river continued to flow, but the whispers of its anger traveled with the wind. Children no longer played freely along the stilts near the silent bend, and villagers began to cast uneasy glances at Asake and Tala's home. Omo-Elegbe had grown into a strange, quiet child. No one gave the name. She, or he, responded only to the river's call, to the ripples and whispers no one else could hear. Dark brown skin, eyes like storm clouds, small water-shaped mark faint, but ever present on the chest, and long, wiry hair tangled from playing in mangroves. Always barefoot, always watching, always apart. Even Tala noticed it first. "Something is wrong," he muttered, his voice trembling as he watched the child mimic the river's flow in their movements. Hands waving like paddles, steps light as the water itself. Short-cropped hair still damp from morning paddling, dark brown skin shining in the sun, muscles lean and wiry like the canoe maker who trained them, eyes reflecting both curiosity and danger. Asake did not answer. Her dark brown skin glowed in the sunlight streaming through stilts, shaved head glinting faintly, sacred white markings catching the light, flowing white wrapper tied across her chest, blue and ivory beads jingling with each movement. She watched silently, fear coiled in her chest. By the third year, the river's warnings became impossible to ignore. Canoes capsized spontaneously. Fish floated belly up. Children woke screaming of drowning, sometimes in broad daylight. And at night, the wind carried whispers only Omo-Elegbe seemed to understand. One evening, Asake led the child to the silent bend, far from the village. The river glimmered unnaturally in the moonlight, as if expecting them. "Listen," she whispered, kneeling beside the child. "Ominira speaks to you, but you must be careful." The child's eyes, like storm clouds over a restless river, turned toward her. No words were spoken, yet the river seemed to flow into the child's body. It was as if the debt, the prophecy, and the anger of the river had all been placed inside one small vessel. Suddenly the river churned violently. Waves splashed against the stilts, tossing leaves and mangrove roots into the air. A shadowy figure appeared briefly in the water, faintly humanoid, with hair like flowing riverweed, eyes glowing faintly, watching. Asake gasped. It has recognized its child. Tala approached cautiously, muscles tense, short-cropped hair damp, dark brown skin glistening under moonlight, hands flexing instinctively as if ready to defend. He whispered urgently, "We cannot let it take her, or him." The river responded, not in sound, but in movement. Currents twisted toward the child, ripples racing across the surface, a low hum vibrating through the air, felt in bones. Every instinct screamed danger. The child raised a small hand toward the river. The water surged forward, but then drew back, almost hesitant. The river's voice was there, in every ripple and shadow. "The debt has returned. The borrowed one is awake." From that moment, the river no longer flowed as it once did. Currents twisted unpredictably. Canoes toppled without reason. The village trembled beneath the weight of the prophecy. And Omo-Elegbe, who had never spoken, now carried the burden of the gods. Yámọ had survived once. But the river's debt had returned. And this time, it demanded attention. The river had waited. Yámọ woke to an unnatural dawn. Fog rolled thick across the stilts, swallowing the houses in gray-white mist. The river's surface, usually calm, roiled like a living thing. Currents twisted unnaturally, rising higher against the stilts, as if testing the villagers' resolve. Children screamed from the stilts. Fish floated lifelessly on the water. Canoes overturned without warning. Birds shrieked and fled, leaving the air unnaturally silent. In the center of the village, Chief Adigbon and the elders gathered frantically. The earth-colored robes rustled in the fog, cowrie shells clinking faintly. The elders' hands shook on their staffs, faces etched with fear. "The prophecy, it has begun," Chief Adigbon whispered, voice hoarse. Elder Funmalaya replied, trembling. "The borrowed one, the debt." From the edge of the mangroves, Omo-Elegbe emerged, barefoot and silent. Storm-cloud gray eyes glowed faintly, dark brown skin catching glimpses of the morning light. Hair tangled, small water-shaped mark on the chest shimmering, wiry body moving unnaturally with the rhythm of the river. The child's presence commanded the currents themselves. Asake knelt at the river's edge, flowing white wrapper clinging, beads jingling, hands over her chest. Her dark brown skin glistened with sweat, shaved head shining faintly, sacred white markings visible as the fog caught the light. Her eyes were wide with both fear and awe. Tala ran beside her, short-cropped hair damp, dark brown skin glistening, muscles tense, arms raised as if to shield them. "Stay back," he shouted, but the river ignored him. Currents surged forward, sweeping away small canoes and debris. Waves licked the stilts, rising higher, a warning too clear to ignore. And then the water's voice, deep and resonant, filled the air. The debt is mine to collect. The villagers screamed as waves swept across the village. Children clutched their mothers. Men grabbed onto stilts, praying to Aminira and all the river spirits. Omo-Elegbe lifted a small hand, and the river obeyed. Currents twisted around the child, rising like a wall of water, but stopping inches from the stilts. It was no longer a child. It was the river incarnate. Asake fell to her knees, weeping, whispering, "I am sorry. I am sorry for what we did." The river paused, almost listening. Then a single ripple touched the stilts nearest her. It was a mercy, but the village had learned, debts are never forgotten. The storm abated slowly. Currents calmed. Fish sank back beneath the surface. Canoes were righted, though cracked and broken. The river returned to its normal flow, yet the fog lingered. Yámọ would never be the same. Omo-Elegbe returned to the shadows of the mangroves, silent as always, small hand raised briefly toward the river, storm cloud eyes watching, warning, promising. The river had awakened. From that day, the villagers spoke in hushed tones of the child and the river, knowing that one day, the debt would call again. Yámọ had survived, but the river never forgets.
Folktales brought you here, but joy will keep you listening. Subscribe now to my channel. Keep enjoying the episode from Tales by Nnamdi.
Weeks passed after the river's wrath. Yámọ slowly returned to its rhythm. Canoes floated again, fish returned to the river, and children dared to play along the stilts once more. Yet the villagers did not forget. Whispers of Omo-Elegbe haunted every conversation. Mothers told their children, respect the river, and do not anger the borrowed one. Asake and Tala survived the ordeal, but their lives were changed forever. Asake moved through the village like a shadow of her former self. Dark brown skin glowing faintly under sunlight, shaved head reflecting light, sacred white markings visible, flowing white wrapper trailing softly, beads jingling. Her eyes were haunted, filled with knowledge the elders could not understand. Tala remained by her side, muscles still tense, short-cropped hair often damp from river work, dark brown skin glistening in the sun, hands protective yet weary. His heart, once fearless, now carried the memory of what the river had demanded. The child, Omo-Elegbe, appeared rarely. Small, wiry body moving like water itself, dark brown skin reflecting the sunlight, storm cloud gray eyes deep and knowing, tangled hair, faint glowing water-shaped mark on chest. Every appearance reminded the villagers that the river's debt was not forgotten. It was merely paused. One evening, Asake led Tala and the child to the edge of the silent bend. The river shimmered in the fading sunlight. Currents twisted gently, as if acknowledging their presence. The child raised a small hand toward the river. A faint glow spread from the water-shaped mark on the chest. Ripples extended across the river, brushing the stilts, whispering of unfinished debts. Asake whispered, "The river remembers. The gods watch." The child's eyes met hers. No words were spoken, yet understanding passed between them. Yámọ was safe, for now. The river would never forget. One day, the debt would return. And then, as silently as the river had claimed its first debt, Omo-Elegbe vanished into the mangroves, leaving only ripples behind. The village stood in awe and fear. Life returned to the stilts, but a subtle unease lingered. Mothers whispered prayers at each crossing. Canoes moved cautiously along the river. And from the shadows, the story of the borrowed one began to spread beyond Yámọ. A warning and legend rolled into one. The river had been merciful, but only temporarily. And the borrowed one was always watching. Yámọ survived. But the river never forgets. Thank you for joining us on Tales by Nnamdi, where the voices of our ancestors speak through every story. I hope this tale has touched your heart, stirred your imagination, and carried you into the world of our people. Remember, like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss another journey into the wonders of folklore. Until next time, let the stories guide your soul and awaken the spirit within.